Hello everyone, I am Jean Fransanito and together with my partner Edlin Gomez, we are tasked to report about the Japanese literature. These are the topics that we will cover. Development of Japanese literature from beginning to the modern period, life and works of Japanese authors, haikus of Basho, Busun, and others, suggested literary pieces, which are Charm and Beauty of Japanese Poetry, In a Groove by Akutagawa Ryunosuke, and the classical Japanese writings in the Tale of Genji. I will be reporting the two topics, and the other two will be reported by my partner. These are our objectives. Affective. Reflect the significance of the famous authors in Japan that contribute to the development of Japanese literature. Skill. Construct a timeline on the significant events that happened during the development of Japanese literature from the beginning to the modern period. Knowledge. Identify the works of famous Japanese authors. Background. Japan is spread over 6,000 islands and has a surface area of 377,915 kilometers, making it slightly larger than Germany. The archipelago stretches from south of the Russian Sakhalin Island in the north to near Taiwan in the southwest. It is profiled as the land of the rising sun, which is a nation that occupies a chain of islands in East Asia in the North Pacific Ocean, roughly parallel with the eastern coast of Asia's mainland. Its main islands consist of Hokkaido, Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu. The country shares maritime borders with China, North and South Korea, the Philippines, Russia, and Taiwan. While retaining its time-honored culture, Japan rapidly absorbed Western technology during the late 19th and early 20th century. After its devastating defeat in World War II, Japan recovered to become the third most powerful and a staunch ally of the US. This is the flag of Japan. Who are the Japanese people? Japanese people are an ethnic group that is native to the Japanese archipelago and modern country of Japan. They constitute 98.1% of the country's population, and they belong to a homogeneous country. The Japanese have traditionally prided themselves on the racial harmony of their people and sometimes describe Japan as a monoracial society with one language and one set of commonly held beliefs. This means that there are non-Japanese ethnic groups in Japan and very few of the non-Japanese are Japanese citizens. Culture. The following are just a few of Japan's culture that Japanese people usually practice. Number 1 is expressing appreciation. One common mistake people make in groups is that they expect someone else to say thanks. When we are in Japan, we will have to do our own part. We write thank you notes to express appreciation for a special invitation and so on. Once we don't actually need a formal thank you note, a picture postcard is fine. Small gifts are a nice way to show special appreciation. Next is visiting Japanese families. If you are invited to another family's home, it is polite to bring an omiyage, a small gift such as cakes, fruit, or snacks, and it is also good to greet the whole family. Next, tipping. Tipping is an unnecessary practice among many Japanese. They consider good service as standard and therefore do not expect to receive tips. Shoes. Take off your shoes when entering a Japanese home. Slippers are often provided and socks are also allowed on tatami or straw mats. When changing shoes, don't touch the floor with your feet. When you take off your shoes, place them neatly together. Bowing. Bowing is a traditional greeting in Japan. A handshake is also acceptable. Meals. When eating with your host family or with other Japanese people, you must observe the following rules. First, using of chopsticks. Never place your chopsticks so that they stick up directly out of your rice. This is the traditional way of offering rice to the dead. Also, never pass food between your chopsticks and another's chopsticks. This resembles the traditional funeral ritual of placing the bones of the dead in a mortuary urn. Avoid making these mistakes. Number 2. Responses. After food has been placed on the table and you sit down for dinner, it is very common to say itadakimasu, which means I will receive. At the end of a meal, it is common to say gochiso-sama deshita, or thank you for the great meal, which is a polite and respectful way to offer thanks. If you feel uncomfortable at first saying these phrases before and after dinner, try listening to your host family and you will gradually feel more comfortable. Names. The Japanese rarely use first names when addressing colleagues or acquaintances. Last names are used more often with a polite attachment san, which is Mr. and Miss, or sensei for physicians, teachers, politicians, after the name. Always use sensei when addressing your instructors. These examples of proper decorum in Japan are just a few of many, but are a useful guide when traveling in the country. What languages are spoken in Japan? So according to survey, Japanese language ranks as 1, which has 121 million number of speakers, followed by Aino, which is almost extinct, and followed by Amami Oshima Northern, which has 10,000 number of speakers in Japan. Origin of Japanese literature. The first writing of literature in Japanese was occasioned by influence from China. The Japanese were still comparatively primitive and without writing when in the first 4th century CE, knowledge of Chinese civilization gradually reached them. They rapidly assimilated much of this civilization, and the Japanese scribes adopted Chinese characters as a system of writing. The use of Chinese characters enormously influenced modes of expression and led to an association between literary composition and calligraphy lasting many centuries. The earliest Japanese texts were written in Chinese because no system of transcribing the sounds and grammatical forms of Japanese had been invented. Short history of Japan literature. Japanese literature was divided into 5 periods, and number 1 is the Nara period. Japanese literature traces its beginnings to oral traditions that were first recorded in written form in the early 8th century after a writing system was introduced from China. The Kojiki, or Record of Ancient Matters, which is a collection of myths and legends, and Nihon Shoki, or Chronicle of Japan, were completed in 712 and 720 as government projects. The Fudoki, or Records of Wind and Earth, was compiled by provincial officials beginning in 713, described the history, geography, products, and folklore of the various provinces. The most brilliant literary product of this period was the Manushu, or the collection of 10,000 leaves, an anthology of 4,500 poems composed by people ranging from the unknown commoners to emperors and compiled around 759. A verse form comprising 31 syllables, known as tanka, also emerged. The Kokin Wakasho or Kokinsho, the collection of poems from ancient and modern times, was published as the first poetry anthology commissioned by an emperor in 1905. The Heian period. The Genji Monogatari formed a critical part of a noblewoman's education during this period. Genji Monogatari, or the early 11th century by Murasaki Shikibu, is considered as the preeminent masterpiece of Heian fiction and an early example of a work of fiction in the form of novel. Artists lavishly illustrated scrolls depicting the story, making the story expensive. Because of this, less well-off noblewomen dreamed about owning a copy. This period, the Japanese were fascinated with Chinese culture. Women were not allowed to speak Chinese. The period expected women to remain separate from men. This period generally refers to the classical Japanese literature. Other important works of this period include the Kokin Wakasho, which is a waka poetry anthology, and Makora no Sushi, the latter written by Murasaki Shikibu's contemporary and rival Se Shunagon. In the 10th century Japanese narrative, Taketori Monogatari can be considered as an early example of proto-science fiction. In this time, the imperial court patronized the poets, most of whom were courtiers or ladies-in-waiting. Number 3 is the Kamakura Muromachi period. In the latter half of the 12th century, warriors of the Taira clan seized political power at the imperial court, virtually forming a new aristocracy. Heike Monogatari, or the tale of the Heike, which depicts the rise and fall of Taira, was completed in the first half of the 13th century. The Shin Kokin Wakasho, or the collections of new poems from ancient and modern times, was also completed around this time. This period also produced Typified by Kamo no Kome Sujoki, which reflects on the uncertainty of existence, and Yoshida's Kinko's Choi Sorigusa, a work marked by penetrating reflection on life, which both works raise the question of spiritual salvation. The Taiheki, or the Chronicle of the Great Peace, depicting the 50 years from 1318 to 1367, when two rival imperial courts struggled for power, is a valuable historical record. Also, during this period, Japan experienced many civil wars, which led to the development of a warrior class and subsequent war tales, histories, and related stories. Work from this period is notable for its insights into life and death, simple lifestyles, and redemption through killing. Other notable genres in this period were ringa or link verse and no theater. Number 4 is the Edo period. Around this time, the function of literature as a means of social intercourse broadened. Increased leisure time gave the rising merchant class a chance to explore things. Composing ringa, or the successive link verses by several people forming a long poem, became a favorite pastime, and this gave birth to haikai, which is a sort of jocular ringa in the 16th century. It was the renowned 17th century poet Matsubasho who perfected a new condensed poetic form of 17 syllables known as haiku, which is an embodiment of elegant simplicity and tranquility. In the Jinroka period or era, city-dwelling artisans and merchants became the main supporters of literature, and the professional artists began to appear. Two giants emerged in the field of prose. The first is Ihara Saikako, who realistically portrayed the life of Osaka merchants, and the second one is Chikamatsu Monzimon, who wrote Jorori, a form of storytelling involving chanted lines and kabuki plays. These writers brought about a great flowering of literature. Later, Yusa Busun composed superb haiku depicting nature, while fiction writer Oida Akinari produced a collection of Gothic stories called Ogetsu Monogatari, which is the tales of moonlight and rain. Number 5, Meiji period up to the present. In the Meiji era, unification of the written and spoken language was advocated, and Futabeti Shimi Okigomo won acclaim as a new form of novel. In poetry circles, the influence of translated foreign poems led to a new style poetry movement. Novelists Mori Ogai and Natsumi Susiki studied in Germany and Britain, and their works reflect the influence of the literature of those countries. Akutagawa Ryunosuke wrote many superb novelettes based on his detailed knowledge of the Japanese classics. Naturalism, as advocated by Emile Zola, dominated Japan's literary world for the first decade of the 20th century. In 1968, Kawabata Yasunari became the first Japanese to win the Nobel Prize for Literature, and U Kinzaburo won it in 1994. Let us proceed to the Japanese authors who have helped define Japanese literature and their notable works. Collectively, these Japanese authors have written across genres and time periods to create a diverse, fascinating, and body of work. Number 1 is Haruki Murakami. He is one of the most well-known Japanese authors to English speakers. Haruki Murakami has written more than 20 novels, short story collections, and non-fiction titles. Was born in 1949 in Kyoto. His work has been translated into more than 50 languages, and he is a fan of jazz music. He owns more than 10,000 records that he listens to while writing. His most notable works include IQ-84, Killing Commendator, The Wind Up Bird Chronicle, Kafa on the Shore, and What I Talk About When I Talk About Running. Number 2 is Natsuki Rino. She is a crime writer who is perhaps best known for forcing readers to reconsider women's capabilities for violence. She was born in 1951 and dabbed in many different professions before settling on writing, and it wasn't until the 1990s that she found success. Her most famous novel is Out, which has a breakout hit in Japan, winning the Grand Prix for crime fiction and was a finalist for the Edgar Award when it was translated into English. She has written more than 20 novels and short story collections, which solidifies her position as one of the most celebrated Japanese writers of today. Number 3 is Kobo Abe. Kobo Abe was a Japanese poet, essayist, playwright, and novelist, born in 1924. As a staunch pacifist, Abe was drawn to and joined the Communist Party. When he saw how the party treated poor workers, he broke with them. His books and plays have been translated into English, including The Ruined Map, Secret Rendezvous, The Baxman, and The Face of Another. But it was The Woman in the Dunes, published in 1962, that proved to be Abe's international breakout hit. Number 4 is Banana Yoshimoto. She is a notable writer born in 1964 to a liberal family of artists and writers. She was only 23 when her first novel, Kitchen, was published. She went on to write 12 more novels and essay collections, and her work was produced into Japanese TV shows and movies. Yoshimoto's work often deals with youth, existentialism, and how tragedy can shape our lives. Among her most notable works include Kitchen, NP, Asleep, Lizard, and Umbrella. Number 5, Yoko Ogawa. Born in 1962, and she is a prolific author of more than 40 works of fiction and non-fiction. However, only a small fraction of her work is available in English, including her 2003 novel, The Professor and the Housekeeper, which was made into a movie called The Professor's Beloved Equation and Revenge, is a collection of unsettling short stories. Her most recent title to be translated into English is The Memory of Police. Number 6, Sayaka Murata. Sayaka Murata has written 10 books that are immensely popular in Japan. She was born in 1979 and she first published her work in 2003. Murata has received various awards such as the Gunzo Prize for New Writers, the Mishima Yukio Prize, and the Akutagawa Prize. She's written across genres, but her books tend to look at society, conformity, and human behavior. Her first novel, translated into English, is Convenience Store Woman, which is narrated by Nancy Wu, and the second one is Earthlings. Number 7, Yukio Mishima. Often regarded as one of the most important Japanese writers of the 20th century. He was born in 1925. He is also a controversial figure. He went on to write and publish 34 novels, 50 plays, and numerous short stories. In 1968, he founded the Tatenokai, which is a private military force meant to protect the Emperor of Japan. In 1970, he and the 3 members of Tatenokai attempted a coup d'etat to restore power to the emperor, and when it failed, he performed a ritual suicide. His most famous books include The Sound of Waves, Spring Snow, The Temple of the Golden Pavilion, and The Sailor Who Fell from the Grace with the Sea. His work continues to find new audiences, and The Life for Sale was just recently translated to English. 8. Ryu Murakami. He was born in 1952 and he's been in bands and worked as an indie filmmaker. He's also been a talk show host and founded a video streaming service and an ebook service. He writes more than 30 books, and his most well-known book is Edition. It was made into an influential Japanese horror film in 1999. 9. Kanae Minato. She is well-known in Japan for her mystery and crime novels, and she has been crowned as the Queen of Iyamisu novels. She was born in 1979 and writes 14 novels. Only 2 of her novels are translated in English, and these are Confessions and Penance. 10. Keigo Higashino. He was born in 1958. He took the prize in 1984 and gave up engineering to become a full-time writer. His novels has been made into a TV show or movie in Japan, and his book Naoko was made into a film. His English translations include The Devotion of Suspect X, Salvation of a Saint, Malas, Under the Midnight Sun, and most recently, Newcomer. The 10 mentioned personalities are only a few of the Japanese authors who contributed to the development of Japanese literature. And that's all for my report. Thank you for watching.